Hello ladies and gentlemen, it's Danger Fishing here. Today, I'm dropping, obviously, this Q&A. If you stay in there long enough, sometime throughout this video, Stacey King talks about a new bait that's coming to Bass Pro either February or March. And it's supposed to be a really good spring bait, so keep an eye out for that. Try to stay for as long as you can. If you have to, come back later. But be sure to like and subscribe because this is definitely my first one I've ever done. But if you do like it or don't like it, comment down below and please let me know so I can maybe plan to do more videos like this. Thanks for watching, guys. Let's get to it.
Stacey King.
Thank you very much. I don't know, can you all hear me? Right here, so I don't particularly have any subject matter that I want to talk about other than Roseanne had mentioned 2 or 3 things when she emailed me about this, just about fishing in general, but what I'd like to do is talk about, what you guys want to talk about. I mean, if you got some questions or if you got some particular techniques or patterns or whatever that you want to talk about, I'd be glad to do that. They mentioned one thing about, I won that Costa Angler of the Year last year, or this past year, and one of the tournaments I had on that circuit, I caught a big stringer at Lake the Ozarks, and they mentioned that, and they maybe want me to talk a little bit about how I did that, and I'll do that real quick, and then we can go for some questions or whatever. But we had that tournament up there last fall in October, and fishing was so-so. It was pretty good, and we were having some inclement weather, but during the practice period it was pretty nice, and I've been going out every morning early and throwing a topwater for an hour or two, and then I would go pitch worms and jigs around docks and stuff like that. And I was catching a few fish. I wasn't doing real good, but I'd get a couple of bites on the topwater early in the morning. I was using a Zero Spook, and then I got to throwing a bait. It's called an evergreen shower blow. It's a great big long topwater with 3 hooks on it, and it really makes a lot of noise when you twitch it. If you work it like a Zero Spook, you twitch it back and forth, and it really pops and throws water, and it's a great big bait. It's something that I just got on a couple years ago, and that a lot of guys were throwing it on Kentucky Lake, and I bought a couple of them when I was going down there for some tournament, and I never did use them hardly, even catch anything. And then a friend of mine got to catch them on Table Rock on it last spring, so I started fooling around with it, and I started catching some pretty good ones on Table Rock on that topwater. So anyway, at Lake of the Ozarks, I got to throwing that shower blow deal early in the morning, bone-colored topwater, and I'd get 2 or 3 bites on it every morning. Maybe a couple of them would be real nice keepers. I wasn't catching a lot of big ones, but it was sunny. The weather was sunny and pretty calm in practice. You'd only have about an hour or so before the sun got up on the water, and then after that they quit biting and I couldn't catch them anymore. So my plan was in that tournament to go out and fish that topwater for a while early and then go pitch and flip around docks and stuff like that, try to scratch out the limit. Well, the first day of the tournament, it was pretty clear and cold, and I did that. I caught a couple on that topwater, and then I scratched out 2 or 3 more and ended up with 11 or 12 pounds, which wasn't very good. I mean, I was way down the list somewhere. I don't know where I was. But then this front came in that night, and we got a real low pressure, real cloudy, cold day, and it was raining, and it was miserable. I mean, I was freezing to death out there. But I I started off my topwater just like I planned, and the first bass I caught was one that weighed 613. He blasted it right by the corner of a dock, and I mean, that got me fired up and got me going, and I caught about 20 on that topwater that day. I had another one that weighed well over 6, and ended up with 5 that weighed 23 pounds, and moved from like 70 or 80th to first. And so it shows you that you can do it, and it was all a conditions thing. It was all because of the conditions we had that day that I got fortunate and had the right bait on and was in the right area where there's a lot of big bass. But I moved up to first place, and then it was funny, the next day, the 3rd day of the event, the top 10 fished, and we had another cloudy day. It wasn't quite as low pressure and not raining like it was the first day. And I could not get him to bite that topwater to save my tail. I fished it on and off all day. I never did catch one on it. But I finally scratched around, caught 3 pretty good fish on a worm, and ended up dropping to 4th place. But that topwater deal is something that y'all need to think about. There's quite a few of those cup mouth walking topwaters that are made like that shower blow. Berkeley's got one now, and there's 2 or 3 other companies that are selling them, and there's something, they got a big rattle in them, and they just make a tremendous amount of noise on the surface. And those bass, big bass, especially when they're aggressive and feeding, they like that bait. I had a lot of fun. I was throwing it on a little 6.6 medium action topwater rod with 17-pound, not fluorocarbon, 17-pound test monofilament, because that monofilament keeps your bait up higher, close to the top of the water. And boy, those big ones, they were fighting. It was a struggle to get them in, but it was a lot of fun. Start preparation for any tournament sometime before the tournament. As a matter of fact, I'm fishing a BASS Open event on Toledo Bend Reservoir in Texas in about 3 weeks. I think I go down there on the 15th of February. And I've already started my preparation for that event. First thing I do is want to have all my tackle in order. You know, I hadn't fished a lot since October, since November, really. I hadn't fished a whole lot, so my tackle all need to be gone through and sorted and squared away. And I know the general patterns that are going to be working down there on that lake this time of the year. As a matter of fact, I won a Bassmaster event down there once about the same time of the year. I caught those fish on a jig that time. But anyway, I want to get my tackle ready, get all my rods and reels prepared, you know, line, fresh line and everything, and then be prepared for several different type bites, like a spinnerbait, jig, crankbait, rattle trap. They love that down there. And then if it warms enough between now and then, there'll be a soft plastic bite where you can catch them on a Texas rig lizard or a Cinco or something like that. But I know in general what kind of baits I need to be using. But I'll start doing some map study too, you know, refresh. I've had a lot of experience on that lake, so I know where a lot of the creeks and bays and stuff are, but I'll do some map study to get me in, refresh my mind on how the lake lays and where the creeks are and the names of the places. And then I also get on Google Earth and look at that a lot. I study them, you know, Google Earth a lot and Navionics maps, so I kind of get the lay of the flats where if the fish are moving into spawn, I'll know where there's some good spawning areas and stuff like that. And it all kind of boils down to, you know, about the most important thing to me in bass fishing is learning the seasonal patterns of bass behavior. You want to know what bass are going to be doing. I mean, you have a general idea of what they might be doing or whatever time of the year it is you're going fishing. If it's right now, you know, it's pretty much still winter time, so you know they're going to be pretty much in the winter phase. But it won't be long till the days are getting longer and it starts warming, and they're going to be getting into the pre-spawn stage where they get real aggressive, start moving shallower, getting real aggressive, feeding up for the spawn. Then you'll go into the spawn stage where they're on the beds, and virtually every fish in your lakes are going to be shallow at that time, so you don't even worry about fishing out in 100 foot of water or whatever. You know they're going to be shallow. And then you have a post-spawn situation where the fish start moving back out. They typically will move out on the points, points and drop-offs and ledges and stuff like that. And they have a tendency to school more at that time of the year. And I like to fish it. That's one of my favorite times of year to fish, is during the post-spawn phase, because they're usually pretty aggressive. They're hungry from being in a spawn situation. And there's usually a lot of them together. If you find them, you can catch more than one in one place. So that's one of my favorite times. And then you'll move into the summer phase where, you know, it's hot and they usually hold tight to cover, maybe feed more at night or early in the morning, late in the evening than they do up during the day. Although I caught a lot of the biggest bass I've ever caught during the hottest part of the day in the summer, because you know, a bass's metabolism is run by the water temperature. You know, the hotter it gets, the faster bass go. And so they get pretty active and pretty aggressive when the water gets real hot. And if they get a chance to chomp on a big shad or something during the daytime, they'll do it. I caught some big ones in the middle of the day when it was 90 to 100 degrees. But then you drop back into the fall season, and typically at that time of the year, I find you'll have two distinct patterns of fish. There'll be a lot of fish will start moving deep and moving back in the creeks, following bait fish. But a lot of fish will go shallow that time of the year too, that have been out in deeper water in the summer pattern, and that time of the year you can catch them on top. That's when you start catching them on top waters and spinnerbaits and stuff like that, like I did at Lake the Ozarks. But that's how I prepare. I try to get in my mind what season it is, have my equipment ready, do some map study, and then I'll get to practice 2 or 3 days for the tournament usually too, to give me an idea. And all that stuff about the seasonal patterns, you know, it isn't the exact same time every time of the year. You know, it can be dependent upon weather, whether it's cold or hot or whatever. And it changes if you go from the north to the south, it's a little bit, but they all the bass go through the same scenario every year. They go through those same patterns at some time. So that gives you a little bit of idea. Well, you know, there's three primary types of fishing line that I like to use, and it's monofilament, fluorocarbon, and braided line. Those are the three lines that I use. You know, years ago, all we had, well, we started out, when I was a kid, I started out using braided line and you know, braided Dacron, braided nylon. That's all we had back 50 years ago, you know, was nylon line. Well, then somebody came up with monofilament and started making it, and then I went to use monofilament and used it for years and years and years. And then they came up with fluorocarbon, and I started using fluorocarbon and found out that, to me, fluorocarbon is the very best line you can use for fishing jigs and worms and baits that you need to feel, because monofilament has a lot of stretch. Fluorocarbon doesn't have near as much stretch. It's a lot more sensitive. You can feel bites better, you can get a better hook set, penetrate the fish's mouth better. And one thing about fluorocarbon, monofilament has a tendency to stay up in the water, but fluorocarbon sinks. It's a denser line and it goes down. And then the other line we use we've kind of gone back to using the braided line, because there's no stretch in it, and you can get a really strong braided line in a very small diameter. So you can, you know, fish a lot, especially when you're fishing around real heavy cover, grass or wheat or trees or whatever, you know, wood, or, you know, if you're fishing for really big fish. You know, something like a 50 or 65 pound test braid line would be good to use in that situation. But my favorite line is fluorocarbon. You know, I still use mono for throwing top waters, or shallow crankbaits, or maybe spinner baits, something I want to keep up high in the water column, I'll use monofilament for. But fluorocarbon is my favorite. I use it on a lot of stuff. Yeah, and especially jigs and worms, because I just feel that bite so good, and I don't have to jerk so hard to get a good hook set on them by using fluorocarbon. I'm not really into that copolymer too much. I don't know that much about it, you know, but I guess it's good, but I don't know that much about it. He asked me about the coast at Table Rock. I finished 4th in that tournament, and I caught him swimming, mostly on a swim bait. I caught him on small swim baits, like a 3-inch and a 4-inch Bass Pro Speed Shad. And I was using 3/16 or quarter-ounce head on 10-pound test line, using it on a bait caster, something I could throw. I catch lots and lots of bass on Table Rock with that technique that time of the year. It was in April, wasn't it? Or yeah, and you know, the fish are shallow. They up there, they're getting ready to spawn. They are spawning, you know, and there's a ton of them shallow. And we got lots of smallmouth. A lot of the fish I caught in that event was smallmouth. Although I did have a couple of big largemouth too, and I caught all of them on a swim bait. And I was using a little, couple of colors I like to use. That one that's, it's called Sightfish. It's a white with a little silver flash in it, and then I use another one it's a kind of a silver with a little silver gray with a little silver sparkle in it. Those are my two favorite colors. And I like to take that, you know, put it on a 3/16 or quarter-ounce head. You can throw that little thing a mile, and I'll just let it go down, and sometimes I'll let it go to the bottom, depending on the depth of water you're fishing. But I'll let it go down, and then I just slow roll that thing back, just so that tail on that Speed Shad kicks. You know, there's a lot of good swim baits on the market like that, and you just want to be able to feel that little tail vibrating and kicking, and those bass can't resist it. I mean, it looks just like a bait fish that they've been feeding on all their life, and it really works. You know, there's lots of good patterns. Table Rock's getting ready to break loose here just as soon as we have just a few warm days, which we haven't had. It's been miserable. I've been wanting to fish some. I got a new boat just like this one right here, and I have got 3 hours on the engine, started to get my break-in time on it. And I fished a little bit back 2 weeks ago, you know, 3 or 4 afternoons, but it got so cold I can't handle it anymore. That cold weather works on my hands. They don't work as good as they used to. But I'd love to be out there doing some fishing if it'll get decent. Hopefully before long we will have some good weather, and the fish will start getting active and start moving up. You know, the fishing down there for the last 2 or 3 months has been primarily deep water fishing. You get out and you find the bait fish and the fish with your electronics and your vertical fish for them. I'm not much into it. It's tedious to me, sitting there jerking a spoon up and down like this all day, or They use a Rapala ice bait a lot down there, or drop shots, you know, or a tube. That's the type of baits they use when they're catching them, when they're in those shad. But that's not my kind of fishing. I like to be working a bait, you know, a jig or a worm, or jerking a jerk bait or whatever, something that I can keep moving with it. And I guess my patience is not that long, but anyway, we're going to have some good fishing before long. It'll be all over our area here. It'll start getting good, and we have the best fishing coming up. You know, that pre-spawn bite is the best time for you to catch the biggest bass you've ever caught in your life. Probably catch the most bass in one day that you ever caught, you know, because they just get active and get hungry. He was at, they also suggested I talk about swimming a grub and I do that a lot the same way I do the swim bait. I use a four. That's a technique that's been, you know, really successful on our lakes, the Clearwater lakes of Missouri, for years and years. A grub's a hard bait to beat. You know, it mimics a little old bait fish, and it's like I said, it's something that those bass have fed on forever. That little vibration, and they see that little thing going through the water, and I use that grub a lot, and I fish it on bait cast sun, but also throw it on spinning rod. We got to catching some really nice smallmouth in December on a grub there on Table Rock. And I just used a smoked 4-inch Bass Pro Shop grub, just a smoked color with black flake in it, and I was also putting it on a 1/4 ounce head, and I was throwing it on an 8-pound test line on a 7-foot medium action spinning rod with a Bass Pro Shops reel. And I like a big spinning reel, something that's got a big spool on it, because I can cast it. They cast better, you don't get as much twist in your line, and they've got a big drag surface in that spool. So I like big spinning reel, and that's what I've been fishing that grub on, that big spinning reel on 8-pound test line. A lot of guys are going to braid. They'll throw it on like 10-pound test braid, and then they'll put a 6 to 12-foot fluorocarbon leader on there. I do that on some baits, like a Ned rig, for instance. I know that's a real popular technique, has been for the last few years, and it catches lots and lots of fish. And I do use the braid fluorocarbon combination when I'm fishing the little Ned rig and stuff like that. But I still like straight fluorocarbon, like when I'm reeling that grub, or when I'm fishing a shaky head worm too. I like this straight fluorocarbon. But I've tried it with that braid fluoro combination, and I find I don't get as good a hook set. And I think my problem is that I feel those fish too good. You don't have any stretch, you got too much sensitivity, and I feel that strike and set the hook. I don't think I give it to them long enough. And I think with the fluorocarbon, I don't quite feel the bite as good. And by the time I realize one's on there, he's got it in his mouth good, and I get a good hook set in him. But whatever it is, that's just, and it may be just the fact that that's what I'm used to. You know, I've used it for years and years, and just am comfortable with that type of fishing. But I also, back when I was catching them on that grub in December down there, I was catching some nice ones on shaky heads. I like to use a 5 to 7 inch thin type worm, like a Bass Pro Shop Finique worm, or a Zoom, either a Zoom finesse worm or a Zoom trick worm, which is 6.5 inches long, and it was real good. Just you know, my favorite colors in those worms is green pumpkin. I mean, I use some variations at times, but if you want to catch bass, have some green pumpkin worms, because they bite them everywhere. And so he asked me if I dip the tail in the dye. Sometimes I do that. It depends on water clarity. If it's real clear, I typically don't dip my tail in chartreuse. If it's a little bit off colored, I like that chartreuse tail on there. And Bass Pro's coming with another little bait, talking about that Ned rig technique. They're coming with a little bait. It's going to be called a baby sticko craw. It's about this long, and it looks like a sticko or a Cinco type bait. It's just short, but it's got some pinchers coming off of it, and a couple little tentacles. And I got some prototypes of that thing back in December, and got to putting it on an 1/8 ounce jig head and fishing it out on some bluffs. And I got the ones I got were in green pumpkin, and I got some orange dye, and was dyeing those little crawdads this time of the year down there. If you catch a fish and he's got a crawdad sticking out of his gullet, usually it's got, you know, it'll be brown or greenish brown, and it'll have some orange on it. Every one of them will have some orange on it. So I got to put some orange dye on the pinchers on that little crawdad, and man, I caught a bunch of fish on that thing. It's going to be a really neat bait. It'll be out here, and they told me the other day that they'd have them on the shelf in about 30 days, and just in time for the spring season. But it's going to be a great little crawdad to use with the light line techniques and with the little jig heads and stuff like that. he asked when I felt like I had determined a pattern, when I'm trying to develop a pattern when I'm fishing, and then again when I feel like that needs to change. And typically, you know, if you catch 2 or 3 fish doing the same thing or in the same type areas, you can kind of begin to feel like you've got some sort of a pattern going. What I like to do is, you know, maybe catch 1 or 2, and then I'll start, if I'm, depending on what kind of bait I'm fishing, but if I'm fishing like a jig or a worm or something like that, then you can shake them off. If you can go ahead and fish the area a little bit and see how many more bites you can get, but don't set the hook on, just let them chew on a little bit and then try to take it away from them. You can't do that so much with a hard bait, you know, with something that's got treble hooks on it, but I like to do that with a jig or worm. But that's how I kind of determine if I'm getting a pattern going. If I find that I catch them on the same bait and catch a couple of 3, or if I catch them on the same bait in 2 or 3 different locations in the same, you know, type scenario. And as far as a pattern running out on you, you know, it's hard for me to leave a place that I caught a lot of bass. But on the other hand, there just has to be, you know, if you quit getting bites, there has to come a time when you make up your mind you're just going to have to change and start looking again. And it's not easy for me, because if I've been on a good pattern or a good area that has been holding bass, you know, I want to keep pounding because I think there's more there. But you can fish an area out. A good example of that was a coast I fished on Kentucky Lake last summer. And I found 2 or 3 places that had fish, but I had one little area that I caught them and I had to myself, which is pretty unusual, because most of the time when you're catching them on those ledges and those drops, there's other boats around you, fishing around you. But this one place I had to myself, and it had some good ones. I caught 2 or 3, 4 or 5 pounders there in practice. And so I went there the first day, and I was fishing a big shaky head. I was using actually I was using a Bass Pro Shop stick hook, a 6-inch one, and they got one called it's called blue swirl or something. I don't know, it's green pumpkin with a little blue in it. But those big bass really like it in the summertime. And so I caught 20 pounds pretty quick the first morning of that tournament. And so, of course, I went back there the second morning and I caught 17 pounds, and I lost another big one, which would have put me back in the 20-pound range. But I fished it quite a bit that day. I only caught like, I think I caught 4 there that second morning and jumped that one off, and then I kept fishing thinking I'd get my 5th one. I couldn't get another bite there. It was over, you know, and I thought, well, heck, you know, surely there's some more here. But I kept fishing. Finally, I moved and went to another spot and caught my 5th fish to get my limit. So, of course, I went back there the third morning. I was still in the top 10, and I went back there the third morning, and I fished that place and fished it, and I caught 2 little, barely 15-inch fish there all day. And I guess I fished them out. I mean, there was only a school that moved. I think they moved up on this little old gravel bar at night, fed up there at night, and they were up there first thing in the morning. And I think I must have just caught most of them out at school because, and I did try to move a little bit that day, but those big ones just kept hounding me. I kept knowing I'd get another one there, and I just couldn't make myself leave. But that is a perfect scenario when I should have left earlier and went somewhere else. Anybody else got one? You know, if you're fishing a tournament, it's 11, you've got 5 fish, and you want to catch a big fish to move your weight up, and you ask what would you do? You know, it just depends on the situation, what kind of place you're fishing, if it has a lot of big bass, what time of the year it is, as to what baits. You know, I can tell you the scenario there of when I should have made the move sooner. I was fishing a tournament on Rayburn last spring down in Texas, and 2 years ago I was down there and I caught a ton of big fish on a big swim bait. I mean, a bunch of them. And I was using that big Mega Bass Mag Draft swim bait. I really liked that bait. Well, this year I went down, or this past spring I went down there and practiced, and I threw that swim bait and threw it, and I couldn't catch any on it. I just couldn't get them biting it, but it was a warming trend through the tournament, and I'd got on catching on a Texas rig Cinco or Sticko, and I was catching, but I wasn't catching big ones. And I've caught some on a rattle trap and 2 or 3 other baits, but I could catch a limit pretty easy, but they weren't real big. Well, the second day of that tournament, I went out and I didn't even try that darn swim bait, which was silly. And I called a limit, and I called, and I messed around, and I had the 5 bass that weighs 7 or 8 pounds, you know, small bass. And finally, about 1 o'clock that afternoon, I thought, this is stupid. I'm not getting anywhere with this. I need to change. So I picked that swim bait up to try it again, even though I hadn't had any bites on it. And I fished that thing around and I started getting bit on. I caught a 7-pounder and I jumped another 5-pounder off the side of the boat, which was a fish that would have put me in the money if I'd have had him. But that's a time and place. You've got to make up your mind, or make in your mind it's got to click that you need to change and go to some type of a bigger bay, or move to a different area where you think there might be some more quality fish or something like that. You know, it's all a mental thing. You know, a lot of times I'll make the right decisions and do, you know, it's like that day I caught them big ones on that topwater. You know, I caught it, of course I caught a big one early, which gave me a clue that I need to keep doing that. But some days, you know, you just, if you haven't had a bite on something, you just hate to change and try it again. But I should have that day. I should have been throwing it all day. Well, you better have a good rain suit or plenty of warm clothes with you, for one thing. But you just have to do what you have to do. I mean, we face that all the time. You know, the wind may come up, or you may get a storm, or you know, whatever, and you just have to do what you got to do. You know, be prepared for it. It can change the fishing, or it may not. You know, I mean, you may, if the wind gets blowing real hard, you may get blown off the area or the pattern that you were on. You may have to go find something else. Try to get into calm water and look for another pattern or something like that. So you just have to go with the flow and make on the water decisions that help you. John asked about, you know, talking about the barometric pressure, and that really does play an effect on the fish. You know, it's like that day that I caught that big stringer on Lake of the Ozarks last fall. The pressure that day was extremely low. It was, you know, and typically when you have a high pressure and bright skies, fishing is harder than it is if you got a cloudy situation and low pressure. And so that's just what you have to keep in mind and realize that, you know, I can't help the days, for instance, when I'm tournament fishing. You just got to go and be faced with whatever condition it is that you've got in front of you. But if you're just going to go out and fish for fun, you may want to reconsider if it's, you know, 90 degrees, bright and sunny in a real high pressure situation, or if it's real cold in a high pressure situation, or if you get a low pressure and you get a little, you know, cloudy, or maybe a little mist in the air or something. That may be the day that you want to hop in the boat and go fishing, because that's usually when they bite. I mean, I've fished a few pits before, but not in this area, and I've seen them and heard about them all my life, and he got me kind of fired up on it. It looks like there's a lot of good water available here. He gave me one of those little maps that somebody's got over here, and it looked to me like there's just tons of places that you can go put in and fish around here. And I may come over here. I've got one of these aluminum boats somewhat similar to this that I fish small waters in, and I may bring that thing over here and see if I can catch some in these pits. You all probably educate me a little bit on that pit fishing, because I'm not too good not a good hand at it, because I haven't done very much of it, but I would like to try it. I already asked about new hot techniques. I don't know that anything is too hot. You know, they, what's the name of that Japanese technique that they come out with? Tokyo rig. You know, that they come out with this Tokyo rig, and that's, you know, it's something I've been doing for years. We call it a Zika rig. Back, you know, and it's just it's a deal where you have a hook and you have a sinker below the hook, and you put your bait on there, and that sinker will drop straight down through cover, and your bait gets down there. Instead of having your hook behind, the hook's out here at the side and the sinker goes down. But that Tokyo rig, a lot of guys are really hot on that. It's a little wire that comes down with a sinker on it below the hook, and then you can put any kind of soft plastic on there you want to. And that's a new technique that's been pretty hot on the tournament circuit. But it's just it's a standard Zika rig. All that stuff's come from Japan, you know. Those Japanese guys, they figure out a lot of really neat stuff, you know, and we kind of took that, I kind of got on that Zika rig, I don't know, 6 or 8 years ago, and I fished it quite a bit and caught a lot of fish using it. Basically the same thing, but that Ned rig now, that's a deal that, I'll tell you a story about that Ned rig. I know Ned Cady very well that kind of got that thing started. And he and a couple other buddies, mutual friends of mine, I used to go up there and do a lot of hunting around Topeka. He lives out in Lawrence, and those guys got, you know, they kept telling me about how fishing these little old half a Senko or little old short baits you catch a lot of bass on it. They said that's the best thing going for catching bass. And I poo-pooed it. I thought that's the silliest thing I ever saw. And I'd take it out and try it a few times and it wouldn't catch anything, and it didn't. And it was a year or so after I finally started trying to catch them that I started catching some fish on that thing. But the more I fished it, the more fish I caught on it. And I got where I don't know how much money I'd won on that silly Ned rig over the last 10 years. And I was fishing it a long time before it got popular, you know, but I tell you what, that's, if you want to just go fishing and catch fish, it's not the best way to catch the biggest fish in the lake, but it gets you bites. You get lots of bites, and you can catch big ones on it. I've caught some real big ones on it. But it's just a way to get a lot of bites and have a lot of fun. What a great way to get a kid started fishing. I've got my grandkids on that thing, and they love to fish it because all you do is throw it out there and jiggle it along, and one picks it up and runs off with it. You know, it's an easy technique to fish. And talk about a great way to fish in these pits. That'll be a great way to get out there and get a lot of bites and catch a lot of bass. And once in a while, you're going to get one that drags you around when you get a hold of it.
Again, guys, I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for watching, guys. Danger Fishing out.